Welcome back to the Way Out presentation series. This is part 5, the original solution. So far, we looked at some of the psychological and eugenics tactics of the control system. We looked at some of the causal factors as to why these things go on in society. We went over the basics of the occult and the importance of knowledge. Now it's time to examine the solutions to this mess we've created. And we were given the ultimate solution a long time ago in an allegorical story. Unfortunately, we missed the message. It got co-opted and twisted into something none of us needed, a religion. So today we're going to re-examine that story and get to the actual message that was originally intended. Before we begin, I want to correct an error I made in the last video. I quoted from Dr. John Coleman's book, but he was quoting the words of Edward Bernays from the first chapter of his book, Propaganda. I tend to collect quotes from books for future projects, but fail to attribute this one to Bernays, only to Coleman's book. I've never read Propaganda, so I had no idea, so apologies for this. Anyway, let's get started. Part 1, the greatest story ever told. And there's a reason why it's called the greatest story ever told, but it's not any religious reason. If we understand that the real original sin is moral relativism, as I explained in part 2, then what's the real key to salvation? While there is an allegorical lesson to be learned from the story of Eden in Genesis, or the Torah, there's yet another in the New Testament Gospels. The story hasn't changed, only the interpretation, and therein lies the key. And we took the Eden story literally and completely missed the message, and then we did the same thing with the Jesus story. So like Rabbi Maimonides said, every time that you find in our books a tale, the reality of which seems impossible, a story that is repugnant to both reason and common sense, then be sure that the tale contains a profound allegory veiling a deeply mysterious truth. And the greater the absurdity of the letter, the deeper the wisdom of spirit. I brought this quote up before. Now, while the New Testament is not part of Jewish tradition, the sentiment here is still valid. Now, the Jesus story itself isn't entirely original because this story borrows from many other solar hero myths, but they are teaching the same message through allegory. It's the greatest story ever told because it's telling you what you need to do in consciousness and has been told dozens of times in many cultures. The only differences between them are the names and mythos surrounding them. The core concept is the same. You had Osiris, Isis, and Horus, and Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. And there were other solar hero gods like Helios, Apollo, Mithra, and so on. The names and imagery change over time, but the formula stays the same. And it's all symbolic of consciousness and natural law. The sun itself has always been symbolic of truth, and the male offspring was the personification of it, whether it was Horus or Tammuz or Jesus. The Son of God represented right action, the light conquering the darkness. But with the creation of modern-day Christianity by Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, that deeper message was deliberately obfuscated. It was co-opted because they couldn't have the masses empowered. They had to externalize it as something to be worshipped, and the concept of salvation through an authority was made canon. Not a single Christian church today teaches natural law. They encourage submission to ruling authorities, whether it's priests and popes or governments. They never talk about real freedom or sovereignty. They want you on your knees in thrall. So the message was co-opted. It had to be. And then we were sold a false bill of goods. The authentic Christian teachings were deliberately subverted as they were handed down through the centuries. The social engineers of our world needed to co-opt the true teachings and pervert them, because those who know this information would be much more difficult to control. In fact, the main purpose of all ostensible religion is to distract and dissuade human beings from an accurate understanding of natural law. This creates infighting and conflict between sects, making it far easier for the ruling class to divide and rule the masses. And one only needs to look at the history of war, division, and distrust that religion has fomented in humanity, and the endless suffering created by people who have claimed to be acting in God's name. If you understand the esoteric variant of Christianity, you are not going to be controlled. You will understand your individual sovereignty under the Creator and become a being that is non-manipulatable and non-controllable. And when you look at most Christians today, do they understand this? No. Most of them support the control system. They don't understand their sovereignty, not fully. And this is something we need to deeply understand. We need to grok this point right here. Religion is the number one problem. It's the only problem. It's not just cultural religion. Let's look at the etymology once again. It comes from the Latin word religare, meaning to bind or hold back, or to thwart forward progress. So in ancient Latin, if you were describing the act of tying a horse to a post, you'd use the word religare. You're tying it back, keeping it from running off. And that's what religion does. There's a positive variant of this word, too. It could mean to tie back to, or to reunite with, like reuniting with truth, binding yourself to truth, which is the true religion. We need to reunite with truth, with true morality. But when you understand what religion actually is in the world, you'll understand that it's not doing anything good for anyone. Religion is the hidden hand behind all world domination and control. Many people want to say it's the deep state, or it's the bankers, it's the Freemasons, etc. No, it's religion. Religion is at the peak of the control system, top of the pyramid, because what ultimately controls the world is a priest class, a sorcerer class, and they have a religion. It's called Satanism, and they're giving it to people through all of these other religions. It is the force that runs this world. It is the entire problem, specifically the false religions of authority, government, and money, which serve to thwart the progress of human consciousness and morality. Truth is the one and only true religion. Knowing the truth about who we are and how the laws of reality work is the only thing that can reunite humanity's collective behavior into accordance with natural law. To seek and understand the truth about what is happening within and around us is an essential and fundamental aspect of true Christianity. True Christians understand human consciousness. They don't scoff at the term or demonize it. Fake Christians do that. Many hear the term Christ consciousness and say, oh, it's New Age stuff. Well, the New Age uses that term, but they don't really understand what it means. It's not some mystical state of ascension. It's about being a conscious, awake, and moral human being. Now, I'll be talking more about this shortly. One of the biggest deceptions of religion is this idea that some external savior is coming any day now to rescue us from all of our self-imposed suffering. This is all about keeping people quiet and docile, to keep you waiting around endlessly instead of acting. And there's lots of options to choose from. Which one is your favorite? Are you waiting for the return of Christ? Buddha? Maybe Horus, the Egyptian sun god, after which the Christ astrotheology myth is based on? 2,000 years older than him, but essentially the same story. Perhaps Mithra, the sun king who conquers the bull. And if you're not into traditional religion, there's some alien races out there clamoring to be our new saviors and caretakers too. And they'll be here any minute. They have to repair their warp drives first and get through galactic traffic, so just be patient. They'll be here soon. Don't do anything drastic like save yourself. No, they've got this. Just keep waiting. And of course, we have our political saviors. Who's it going to be? You see how insane this is? It's all about externalizing salvation to someone else instead of you taking right action in the world. Here's an idea. Look into one of those. There's your savior. All of our spiritual avatars and solar heroes have been trying to explain this for thousands of years, but religion keeps feeding us the co-opted version to keep us externalizing our power to someone else. Because when we do that, we don't act. We sit around while evil runs amok, and that's the idea. Just keep waiting and sitting around in your lotus position, in your pews, or on your knees. That's not what true Christianity is about. Natural law is at the heart of true Christianity. The allegorical figure of Jesus Christ was trying to teach people natural law. Whether you consider it in the area called Judea, or whether you consider it just a biblical allegory, that's what he was doing. Natural law is the true center and teaching of esoteric Christianity, as it is the true nature and teaching of all cultural religions at their core essence. It was always about natural law. And then it got distorted and twisted, because the controllers know if people have this knowledge, it's game over for us. This philosophy predates Orthodox Christianity by thousands of years and can be traced back to ancient solar hero myths, which represented alignment with natural law. The Christ figure of the New Testament is an extension and/or representation of this sun hero tradition who embodies the fullness of natural law. That's what this allegorical figure is ultimately all about. He is the embodiment of living a life in accordance with natural law. And that's a good role model to have. We were supposed to aspire to this level of consciousness, to live by his example of right livelihood, not to put him on a pedestal to worship. One of the first things we talked about was what consciousness is, and that the Holy Trinity is symbolic of it. You have the triad, which is the mind, spirit, and body. The trivium is knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And the Trinity is, through allegorical terms, thought, emotion, and action. Except the feminine aspect was removed and simply called the Holy Spirit. And we'll get to why in a moment. So do you notice how each one of these qualities connects? God is mind, thought, knowledge. This is the creative force. Goddess is spirit, emotion, understanding. This is true care. The sacred feminine. And care is the generative principle. We put our creative energy into what we care the most about. And the male child is the body, action, wisdom. This is the sacred masculine aspect of consciousness. This is what we do with what we know and how we feel. In other words, right action in the world, standing up to tyranny and deception, just like Jesus did. This is what Christ consciousness is. Let's look at these concepts. Unity consciousness. The unification of thought, emotion, and action, bringing both right and left brain hemispheres together to generate holistic thought. In other words, harmony between the sacred masculine aspects and the sacred feminine aspects. Unity consciousness leads to Christ consciousness. Now you're in the world, but not of the world. You're putting a higher level of importance on truth and principle over ego belief systems. This is true self-respect, true conscience, and right livelihood. In numerology, it's represented by the 777, the 7 principles or pillars of natural law in the three components of consciousness. And if consciousness is not unified, and there's contradiction between our thoughts, emotions, and actions, we get satanic consciousness. This is the 666. It isn't the number of a specific person, but of mankind as a whole, in beast consciousness, of being rooted exclusively in the physical and carnal domain. Your awareness is limited. Everything is based in ego. The me mindset. There's no brain balance at all. You're operating on pure solipsism with no concept of truth. Only what you want to believe is true. And there's no spirituality here, no self-love or self-respect, absolutely no conscience. Just more subjective whim and personal preferences, aka moral relativism. And in some cases, it's total lack of empathy for the suffering of others. Again, just me, my survival, my desires, my truth, my freedom, regardless of who gets stepped on to get what you want. And this is the mindset of far too many people right now. We are in the depths of satanic consciousness, and the evidence is all around us. Revelation says the mark is on both the head and the hand. In other words, our thoughts and actions. No mention of the heart. All care is absent, just pure left-brain ego and survivalism, which is why those with the mark will readily go along with the control system. Those who have Christ consciousness will not. So again, we need to understand this concept in the correct context. The Trinity has nothing to do with an actual God or Son of God. It's about human consciousness. The creative force weds with the sacred feminine, and from their union comes the offspring of the sacred masculine. It is the balanced unification of thought and emotion which leads to right, moral action in the world. If there is no heart, no true care, then that union is impossible, and our actions are in folly, not wisdom. And now you see why the sacred feminine aspect was de-emphasized and removed by the Church. This is our Holy Trinity within. Let's go over this deeply so we can hopefully drive this concept home and start changing the world. If we want to achieve true salvation, we have to do this internal work first. The inner great work must be achieved before we can start doing the one great work in the world. And the first aspect is, of course, the mind, our thoughts. In order to move forward in evolution, we have to sacrifice our time and attention. This is how we attain the required knowledge. The knowledge of morality and natural law, especially. To not do that is the failure of our thoughts, which is ignorance. If you're ignorant of this knowledge, then you can't understand what generates freedom. That's why this knowledge is demonized, or why we're dissuaded from it by religion. The dark occult doesn't want us understanding how we create real freedom. The second aspect is spirit, or our emotions. We have to sacrifice our selfish concerns and get out of the me mindset. That's Satanism. And when we put aside our selfish concerns, we widen our concerns through true care. Care for truth, care for freedom, care for justice. And if we don't do that, we get the stagnation of our emotions, which is apathy, where we don't give a shit about what's going on. And that's where most of us are right now in consciousness, apathy. And then the third aspect is the body, our actions in the world. You have to sacrifice personal comfort to do this work. And that's why most people won't do it. It's hard work. But if you make that sacrifice and meet the requirement, you get the attainment, which is right action through courage and willpower. And if you're not doing that, then our failure is our inaction through cowardice and laziness. And that last column represents all the destroyers of consciousness. These are the destroyers of the soul. The things that build up the soul are knowledge, care, and right action through willpower and courage. And that's what advances us towards evolution. And once you've begun to do this work, you can never, ever give up. Do what's right, even if it hurts. Let's go back to this term one more time. This is the core of the message. This is the original solution. To be like Christ, or to have Christ consciousness, begins with the possession and exercise of conscience. To fully understand the objective knowledge of which behaviors are right because they do not cause harm to others, and which behaviors are wrongs because they do cause harm to others. Once this is deeply understood and integrated, one can begin to willfully, in every moment of one's life, make the free will decisions to choose right action over wrong action. And this Christ-like behavior requires exactly zero belief. No belief is required. True esoteric Christianity is not a religion. It is a way of being and acting in the world that anyone can align their behavior to. It has absolutely nothing to do with belief or accepting religious dogma or accepting any worldly authority like a church or a state. It's an understanding of law that is in place in the universe and how to align our behavior to that law so that you don't cause harm to yourself and others. And that's all it is. Higher moral standard. The cornerstone of true Christianity is a high moral aspiration embodied in the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule challenges us to treat others the way we ourselves would want to be treated, and not to violate other people's rights just as we don't want our own rights to be violated. This is why even Orthodox Christianity should be held to a higher moral standard than all other world religions. The Golden Rule is a true representation of a higher level of consciousness for those who subscribe to it and attempt to live by it. It's so incredibly simple. You don't want something done to you because it's harmful, right? So, don't do it to other people. That's the apophatic version of the Golden Rule. Don't do unto others what you don't want done unto you. And yet, most human beings cannot understand this. And even if they do, they're not living by it. Let's look at the Jesus story for a bit. Now, whether Jesus was an historical figure or not, his story is still important. Unfortunately, most do not truly understand it. If they did, we wouldn't be supporting this system. Jesus was not a statist, or a communist, or a pacifist. He was an anarchist, teaching other people how to live as anarchists. I can already hear people screaming, he was not an anarchist. Yes, he was. And by anarchist, I'm not talking about communists in disguise who call themselves anarchists while preaching Marxism. No, that's called slavery. They just haven't figured that out yet. He was in open rebellion against all false authority and doctrine. He taught the spiritual principles encompassed by natural law, the non-aggression principle, and the self-defense principle against the violation of rights. He was teaching people to not aggress against others or their rights. But if others aggress against you or your rights, you have a right to use self-defensive force. In other words, don't be ruled by anyone, don't cause harm, but don't take any shit either. That is his story in a nutshell. However, people who say, "Oh, I'm Christian, I follow the teachings of the Bible," won't tell you this. They cannot grasp the fact that Jesus was an anarchist trying to teach people how to live like sovereigns and to do away with worldly authority and false religion. They don't understand who Jesus was in spiritual combat against, even though it's written right there in the scriptures. He taught that every human being is born a sovereign being with self-ownership, freedom, and free will, and that these virtues are not bestowed upon us by man, but are their birthright as given to them by God, creation. And our rights, our freedom, and our sovereignty are not negotiable. They are our birthright, endowed to us by the Creator, simply for existing in the universe. If you can't see that, I really don't know what else to tell you. In the New Testament story, Jesus was a very active dissident who opposed the three major institutions of his day: religion, government, and money. The same institutions which still perpetuate human slavery today. Nothing has changed since that time period. The same institutions are in control of this planet because we learn nothing. They're the unholy trinity. You have religion, which is really the father figure of it all. People want to believe it's the banks or the deep state or the Jews, etc. No, it's a priest class. They've just gone from the overt to the covert, to the occulted realm, but they are still ruling. The occult rulers of the world are a religious priest class, and religion is the father of the unholy trinity because it is thought control. That's what religion is there for, to perpetuate ignorance through blind belief. It's based upon belief, not the search for truth, the actual truth of the reality of the laws of nature. The other two things are also forms of mind control and religion. That's why religion is the ultimate force holding back an understanding of natural law and true freedom from humanity. Because money is also a religion. It's the second most powerful religion besides cultural religion. Money is the feminine or mother figure of the unholy trinity because it's about emotional control. Just as religion in general is about the control of our thoughts, the control of what we care about is directed by the money aspect of the unholy trinity. How many people continuously focus upon money almost all day, every day? This is what the main motivational force for behavior is in the world. Even in the anarchist community, they're still attached to it. If this is what controls your emotions and is what you focus on, instead of doing things purely for the reason that they are the right thing to do, you don't have an accurate understanding of truth and morality. And that is a form of religious binding. The monetary system perpetuates apathy for truth. It creates the mindset of no reward, no effort. So basically, money is the new god to which human beings devote their care, attention, and energy to. It is the ultimate form of religion and is the basis for the New World Order, the Dark New World Order. And these two institutions, religion and money, always work together. This is what the allegorical story of Jesus was about, the unholy trinity of religion, money, and government. Jesus went against the religious priest class first, then the money changers, and then finally the Roman government had him crucified at the behest of father and mother. So government is the bodily part of the control system because it works through physical means, through the order followers. It perpetuates cowardice because people don't want to speak up and do anything because of the fear of the harm that would be conducted upon them by police, military, or other government goons. It's based upon the erroneous belief in authority. It's the violent enforcer for father, the dark occult priest class, and mother, the banksters. And it is itself the new world order of chaos and death. So here's the story. He was an opponent of the established religious priest class during his lifetime and taught real spirituality, which was in direct opposition to the worldview of the Pharisees and Sadducees, the most powerful Judaic religious sects of his time. And he didn't do it politely. He was vehemently against these people and their fake morality. They were more concerned with dogmatic law rather than on treating people as free, sovereign beings. True morality wasn't their objective, control was. And that's why he went against them. And Jesus wasn't soft-spoken about it. He laid down the truth. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind. And it doesn't matter if you do or do not accept the historicity of the account. The idea is to understand the allegorical principles conveyed, so that, so we can learn lessons from them. And that's what's important. He spoke out against the monetary powers of his day and even took physical action against them in the biblical story where he drove out the money changers, the equivalent of monopolistic banking institutions of his time, out of the temple in Jerusalem. So they were like the Federal Reserve of his day. And he wasn't afraid to whip some ass if he had to, because what they were doing was completely immoral and fraudulent and harming people, taking their hard-earned resources. Plus, it was defrauding them mentally and spiritually as well, placing value upon money when it was supposed to be about morality and spirituality. He spoke out against the so-called authority of the Roman government, which was the most powerful governmental institution on earth in his time. Government was the institution which eventually convicted him as an enemy of the state and ordered his murder by crucifixion. So he often said, "Render to Caesar that which is Caesar's," which is another way of saying, let them have their crap and don't have anything to do with said crap. Or in other words, fuck the government. Let idiots believe in that shit. Understand what really is of God, like natural law, like true, objective, inherent, cosmic, universal morality, which is what he was attempting to teach people. Unfortunately, we just didn't get the message. We're still enslaved. We're still in the same human condition that the people of that time were in then. But nothing has changed, which is why we have to step up our efforts and do the work. Through the allegorical story in the New Testament, we see how all the institutions of slavery of Jesus' time, the same institutions of slavery that exist today, colluded to have him murdered with the consent of the brainwashed population. Jesus' murder was actually performed by the police of his time, the Roman centurions. So, Christians of today, you do realize the police murdered Jesus, right? The murder of Jesus was through a collusion of religion, money, and governmental powers. And the actual execution was done by the Roman police, who followed their orders. How could people who claim to be Christian not understand that? They cannot recognize that Roman centurions were the police and military of the Roman Empire, and they were given the orders to do this. And they did it because they were following orders. If Jesus existed today, and the police were commanded to murder him, they would do it in a heartbeat, without question. And yet people who call themselves Christians can't see it. They've been duped and think that the authority of the Creator shares power with man. That man gets to rule and dominate and make up morality and call it law. And they believe this because they bought into Romans 13. The book that they use for the justification of authority being vested in man is called Romans, and they can't even see the connection. Who do you think wrote the book? The people that murdered Jesus are telling you that their authority is legitimate, and today's so-called Christians can't comprehend that. Priests, politicians, and police murdered Jesus Christ. But they're just doing their job, right? They're just following their orders. The bottom line is the unholy trinity of religion, money, and government murdered Jesus Christ, the teacher of the values of the Christian tradition, and the people who actually say that they're followers of the values of that tradition don't even understand that simple concept. A concept that is laid out beautifully in their own allegorical stories. It's bonkers. So, how do you become a true Christian? What does that mean? Again, Jesus was absolutely an anarchist and a dissident against religion, money, and government. To clarify, anarchy does not mean without rules. It means without rulers. It is the absence of slavery. It is true freedom. Those who reject the authority of man and government and reject the concept of an intercessor between oneself and the Creator take personal responsibility for their actions in this realm. Rejecting the imposed rule of the illusory authority of government, true anarchists align themselves with service to a higher power, the natural law of creation, from which all natural rights are ultimately derived. Only anarchists can possibly be true Christians. If you're not an anarchist, meaning you believe in government and man's authority, and you call yourself Christian, you're lying. You don't know what the word Christian means, much less the word anarchy. If you are really a Christian, it will show itself in the way you live. 100%. We will know them by their fruits. An authentic Christian exercises conscience and lives by the non-aggression principle and the self-defense principle, and does not condone or support any institutions which perpetuate any form of slavery. True Christians reject all forms of human and worldly authority because they know definitively that no worldly power can ever be higher than the God of creation. There is no higher power than the God of creation and the laws of the universe, period. They seek knowledge of true spiritual awakening, even if such knowledge has been occulted from them. Authentic Christians practice the golden rule and place ethics above their own personal gain. So they're going to go wherever they have to go to get the required knowledge. They don't shun or fear the occult. And most modern Christians are still largely focused on their own gain. Most of them only care if they're safe. Most care about money. Money and personal gain is more their God than Jesus. And that's not Christianity. That's called Satanism. Putting that level of personal gain above truth, morality, and freedom is Satanism. So here are some key hallmarks of a true Christian. Number 1, knowing the occult, knowledge of the occult, and understanding that there are both light and dark aspects to it. The first and foremost factor of awakening is this number 1 point. The occult is a dual-edged sword, but the knowledge is just a tool that can be used to uplift consciousness or used to control and enslave. These dark occultists are ancient psychologists, so we need to understand the psychology they're using against us. If we're dealing with dark occultists who are using that knowledge to control and enslave, we have to become occultists and use it for the right reasons, which is to uplift consciousness, help people to understand how they're being played and manipulated. And the primary knowledge of the occult is the knowledge of natural law. If you don't know occultism, you can't know natural law. You have to delve into the world of the occult to understand that. Number 2, knowing that truth is singular and objective. Because this is what natural law is. It's not open to interpretation. We have to align our perceptions to it, not the other way around. We don't take the truth and try to align it to our perceptions and fit it into our boxes. That's what religion does. Number 3, knowing the true self and understanding its connection to all. This is understanding that we are part of one consciousness. We are individuated monads having a human experience, but we're still all connected spiritually and karmically. Number 4, knowing that neither the physical nor spiritual realities take precedence over each other. We are spiritual beings having a physical human experience. This doesn't mean that the physical realm is unimportant and that we shouldn't try to improve it. You shouldn't put the spiritual realm on a pedestal above the physical world. This is the spiritual world. You're in it now. The physical domain is the place where we have the experience of spirit. So spirit and matter are one. We need to be spirit in the flesh, in the world but not of it, because this is where the actual learning takes place. This is where the action for changing things takes place. Number 5, being out of ego identification and ego attachment. In other words, stop seeing the physical body as the totality of who you are. We are not our race, our gender, our sexuality, our profession, our religion, etc. We need to let go of these things and see them as just experiences. They don't define us. Number 6, exercising discernment and judgment. So using the trivium method as well. Number 7, being mentally free of all false religions. All false religions, cultural or otherwise. Number 8, knowing there is no such thing as knowledge, which is negative. So no knowledge is negative, it's neutral. The consciousness of the wielder of that knowledge is what determines whether it's good or bad. It's not negative to look at something, even if it's dark or scary. If you don't look at it, you're in ignorance of it, and that's not bliss, that's death of the spirit. 9, knowing the causal factors that have led to the current human condition, which we've gone over. The causal factors aren't external, they're internal. 10, understanding and living in harmony with natural law, knowing what conscience is, and then exercising it through our own free will, choosing right action over wrong. Number 11, knowing and living both pillars of enlightenment, meaning the non-aggression principle and the self-defense principle. Do no harm, but take no shit. Number 12, knowing that authority is an illusion and that all government is slavery. That's one of the biggest factors of being spiritually awake. Number 13, recognizing the critical importance of free will and personal responsibility. Most religions reject the concept of free will. If we're told it doesn't exist, then we feel powerless, and that's the idea, to keep us docile and inactive while evil runs amok. 14, knowing that the so-called negative emotions serve a critically important purpose. Like anger, righteous indignation is a positive form of anger that motivates us to change things. Number 15, knowing that enlightenment is not about pursuing bliss in a world filled with suffering. Enlightenment isn't a bliss state, it's an alchemical transformation. It's coming into knowledge of the self and the universe. 16, knowing what true forgiveness really means. If there's no genuine apology from someone who has wronged you, you can't keep turning the other cheek and letting them do it. That's not true forgiveness. True forgiveness is a two-way street. 17, knowing the difference between what cannot be changed and what should be changed. Because there are things that cannot be changed, like natural law, and things that should be changed, like the current human condition of slavery. Number 18, caring enough to take real-world action to create real-world change. This is about doing, not just knowing. Doing has to follow the knowing. Knowledge comes first, then you have to actually use it. You have to put it out there in a practical application. But that's what wisdom is. Wisdom is what you do with what you know. It's not the knowledge itself. 19, knowing that enlightenment is about influencing others to improve themselves. But this great work is about waking others up to the truth. Some people say, stop trying to wake people up, that's not your responsibility. Yes, it is, actually. Because their ignorance is our enslavement. They affect good people with their ignorance, who don't want to be enslaved, who do want to lead a moral life. The great work is the responsibility, the moral duty, everyone who is truly awake. And People don't really have the right to refuse this information because this is about our interconnected freedom. Our freedom is not individual, it's collective. If you live on your own planet, you have your individual freedom. But while you're living here on Earth with billions of other people, your freedom is tied to theirs, and that means their ignorance of natural law affects your freedom and the freedom of other beings who want to be free. So the people out there who are saying, don't try to wake people up, you don't know what you're talking about. You can't, forcefully wake someone up, but your duty is to give them that information. And finally, number 20, knowing that enlightenment does not equate to perfection. I would consider myself enlightened, but I am not perfect. Enlightenment is about knowledge, not about living a perfect life. That's New Age nonsense. So again, the ultimate solution, the original solution, is and always has been conscience and living in accordance with it. The dark occult ruling class gives exoteric religion to the masses to keep them away from the core esoteric spiritual truth of natural law. These occultists know that the occultation of natural law will always be what keeps the masses enslaved and the ruling class in control. Under natural law, the law of freedom eternally governs the state of freedom of any society, anywhere in the universe. The law of freedom states that as morality increases in the aggregate of any given population, that society's collective freedom will also increase. Conversely, as any society's aggregate morality declines, that society's freedom will proportionately decline. So, in other words, as morality increases, freedom increases. As morality declines, freedom declines. And this is how natural law works. And then you only need to look to the experience that we are having right now. Are we gaining freedom or are we losing it? And therefore you will know in the aggregate numbers whether we are becoming a more moral population or a more immoral population. And I think the verdict is pretty clear. This is why the only prescription that Jesus ever gave for freedom in the New Testament was know the truth. He didn't ask anybody to believe anything except in what he represented. He didn't ask them to believe that he was the Son of God or to worship him. He was someone who understood how natural law worked and how to live according to it. And that's what he taught. He didn't ask anyone to set up a religion in his name. That's what all the people after his existence did. He was referring to knowing the truth regarding our own individual sovereignty, the truth that there is no legitimacy to the notion of earthly authority, and the truth of the difference between right behavior, which does not cause harm to other living beings, their rights, or their property, and wrong behavior, which does cause harm to other living beings, their rights, or their property. This knowledge comprises conscience, and it is the only thing that can ever make us free, according to the law of freedom, which can never be changed or escaped from. So as morality increases, so does freedom. True Christianity is about constant improvement, but never about being perfect. We are in the physical domain. We are flawed human beings, not godlike entities. To make the journey from a false Christian to a true Christian requires one to unsubscribe from all of the hallmark factors of false Christianity and to move forward in consciousness with the knowledge that being enlightened regarding what is taking place both within ourselves and in the world around us does not equal to perfection. There is no such thing in this dimension of being. Christ consciousness is a living embodiment of natural law principles. to which one must endeavor to align their behavior so that our individual and collective choices will not generate self-inflicted suffering. Religious icons like Jesus, Buddha, and others are often propped up as being beings of perfection, which serves to do nothing but create impossible standards that seem unattainable to the average person, dissuading them from even trying. The true standard by which to live is not to be perfect, but to try to be better than you were yesterday and keep going forward. That's what walking the true spiritual path is all about. God's plan for everyone, the great work to end slavery. That is God's plan. It is our shared responsibility at this time to help awaken others by continuously speaking the truth unapologetically, even if we feel burdened by this task, and even if it makes all of those involved feel uncomfortable. Courage and persistence are required to perform this task. The true great work is the arduous task of influencing others to awaken to the truth. It is to help them realize that in supporting and condoning the legitimacy of authority and government, man's law, that they have actually been supporting and condoning slavery, and that they were immoral for having done so. In short, what the great work comes down to is to help people to abandon their false religions, the erroneous and dogmatic beliefs which hold back the progress of consciousness by impeding the reception of truth and natural law. The slavery of humanity is the problem, and the only solution is to live in accordance with natural law. Sacrifice may be required to attain true freedom. The word sacrifice is derived from the Latin adjective sacra, meaning holy or sacred, and the Latin verb facere, meaning to create or to make. So a true sacrifice, made for the right reasons, could be said to be a truly sacred deed. Sometimes we must recognize when it is time to give everything, possibly our lives, to do the right thing, and to make room for new growth. This kind of noble sacrifice is the ultimate act of courage. And this is why Jesus is said to be the Lion of Judea. Become a teacher. Helping to alleviate ignorance is the best way to help alleviate the suffering in this world, because the main causal factor of all that suffering is firmly rooted in ignorance. A true Christian uses their spiritual knowledge and enlightenment to influence the improvement of others. There are endless sorts of works and efforts that people decide to become involved with that only ever treat the symptoms of suffering from the plane of effects, and so they are ineffective in the long term because they do not address the issues of spiritual knowledge and consciousness. The endless stream of self-inflicted suffering will continue until the underlying cause is alleviated, which is always accomplished by transforming ignorance into knowledge through true education. And this is why conscious parenting is so important if one considers themselves a true Christian. And this is what was meant in the allegorical story of the wedding feast at Cana when Jesus turned water into wine. He performed alchemical transformation in consciousness. If so-called Christians, and the so-called truth movement for that matter, focused their grassroots efforts and resources into a worldwide campaign to teach the truth of universal, cosmic, moral, natural law, everyone, think of how many people could be reached with a message of self-improvement, conscience, and freedom. For everyone to know the truth of natural law will truly make us free indeed. And that's the dynamic that has to be taught and learned. Natural law is the law of one. Natural law is the core underpinning of all true morality and the cornerstone of true spirituality. Morality is inseparably tied to freedom and order, and immorality is inseparably tied to slavery and chaos. It is impossible to escape this universal law because at the highest level of our reality, everything is connected. Every being is connected to every other being through the law of one. But when one suffers, all suffer. True Christians know that the true self is pure eternal consciousness, and that we are the spiritual beings having an experience in the physical world to learn and grow in consciousness. They know that the true self has a universal connection to the all, so our actions affect everyone and echo in eternity. True Christians recognize the imperative need for true and objective morality during the time of crisis in which we now live. True Christians study and understand natural law so that they may align their actions to true moral behavior. They reject the trappings of exoteric religion and understand occulted esoteric knowledge and how it has been used to enslave humanity. True Christians reject the illegitimate authority of any human being over another. Most of all, true Christians teach all of these truths to others because they know that the ignorance of anyone affects the freedom of everyone. Lex Rex. Natural law is king. A true Christian embraces peace and the non-aggression principle, holds life and freedom to be sacred, and has a deep reverence for integrating true conscience into their lives by choosing right action. This is why Jesus is allegorically said to sit at the right hand of God's throne. The universal moral law of the universe is the only king of creation, and Christ consciousness is its herald, which ushers in the understanding and practice of natural law and the respect and preservation of the free will and individual sovereignty for all humankind. Now that we've gone over the original solution, we can start looking at some practical things we can do in our own lives. But we'll cover that in the final part of this series. I'll see you then. Thank you.